everyone to round one of the Asia Pacific Asian British Parliamentary Debate Championships 2015. On opening government, we have NSU A, is it? Yes. Yep, NSU A. On opening opposition, Ateneo 4. On closing government, UIU 3. On closing opposition, no, that's UM 3. Closing opposition, NLSIU 2. My name is Rafiq. I'm the chair of this round. Having with me are Joshua Prana and Lida. Without further ado, I'd like to call on the Prime Minister's speaker motion stand. Sorry, before we start the round, as per equity, I would like to ask each speaker to introduce himself and the preferred gender pronoun that you'd like to use. So, Prime Minister. Yeah, I can. Ashma. Roy. Angela. Vinod. Raj. Siddharth. Right, sorry. Without further ado, I now like to let the Prime Minister speak on the motion stand and say.
Mr. Speaker, we see that in various societies, we see in various societies we see that there is a growing the different cultures are subcultures are growing in amongst the majority ones, right? Well, majority ones. However, when celebrities try to attempt to adopt such cultures, cultures, it becomes a problem. Why is that? You have to understand that celebrities are powerful opinion leaders. Just because they appear in movies does not necessarily mean whatever they say or whatever they try to propagate stops there. No, because beyond the movies or the media, people still follow them. People still follow what this. People still take into account what they talk about and how they express their views. Right, express their views, and when it comes down to adopting minority culture, that becomes a problem. That's why we believe that celebrities from dominant majority cultural majorities should not attempt to adopt minority cultures. First of all, I'll be talking about that why celebrities from such majority cultures when they adopt minority cultures is wrong. You have to understand why the celebrity want to adopt from such cultures, want to adopt a minority culture in the first place. Because first of all, we believe that celebrities do it because they like it. But second of all, we believe that they do it for money, do it for the money. For example, for the money nonetheless. We believe that when these are the interests, we believe that there are other alternatives available for them to go in there. But moreover, we believe that when the celebrity tries to adopt the minority cultures and represent them, the portrayal of such minority cultures is not necessarily right. Why is that? Because first of all, these celebrities are not grown up in those minority cultures to begin with. So the norms, the values, the traditions, all the cultural artifacts from such minority cultures are not inbuilt in those celebrities. But second of all, we believe that the incentive of these celebrities to uphold the cultural artifacts of these minority cultures is not there at all. The celebrity, he or she might be doing just because he or she might be liking it. But understand, if it was someone, if it was a celebrity within the minority culture. That celebrity has the incentive to uphold the cultural values, so that the representation of his or her own culture is there. But furthermore, we believe that when such celebrities try to adopt the minority culture, not taken, sir, culture, the cultural artifacts are maybe tampered with, maybe twisted, to attract to gain more popularity, to gain more popularity. For example, we see that we see in certain societies in Africa, we see that the cultural values are twisted. The cultural values are twisted. For example, the superstitions of certain cultures are being twisted so that to gain more attraction for the celebrity. For the celebrity. So we believe that when celebrities are not grown up, when their incentive is not there to represent the culture properly, and when the cultural artifacts are twisted it becomes a problem. And this problem further aggregates when these celebrities appear on media, on public avenue, on mass media avenues such as the television, movies, or on social media. So social media, that becomes a problem, because these celebrities are not these celebrities are exposing these minority cultures to the outer people, and that exposure is a faulty one. This faulty one. This has two impacts. One, the impact comes to the minority, the people in those minority cultures, and but secondly, it comes to the celebrity itself. Now, what is the impact on the minority, on the people, on the population who belongs to the minority culture? First of all, we believe that there is a there's a rising tension within the people who belong to this minority culture. How is that? Because first of all, these people, the ones in the minority culture, will become angry because their culture is not being represented properly, is being tampered with. But second of all, we believe that some people within this minority culture will become angry solely because someone else other than their own to represent, not taken, sir. It's right to represent represent their culture. But before I move on, any POI.
Sir, can you give us an example of what you're talking about? Like, what's a bad harm? Like, are you talking about like Miley Cyrus showing twerking dances?
First of all, we believe that even if when it comes down to a celebrity trying to adopt, what you need to understand is that adopting a particular culture in an improper fashion is not okay, because it's not okay, and this will be explained about within the impact of taken, within the impact that I will be talking about. So moving on, first of all, I've only told you that how false representation will make this minority population with the minority culture. Second of all, your people who sees this celebrity representing the minority culture will start to generalize. By thing, because whatever the celebrity is doing under the curtain of representation of the minority culture, the other people who sees this celebrity will think that, oh, guess what, everyone in that culture does the same thing. So if the celebrity makes twisted cultural facts, a cultural artifact, that this will give a wrong impression and a wrong perception to other people who are seeing it, and that will see it. But furthermore, but more importantly, we believe that the people in those minority cultures do not want their culture to be publicized in the first place, because if they needed to, in the first place. Hence, we believe that celebrities are not the person to represent these minority cultures, because they attract a lot of publicity. So summing it all up, what we talked about that why celebrity should not be representing the minority cultures when they belong to the majority. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for that speech. Now, to begin the debate on the opposition bench, I'd like to invite the leader of opposition, Roy
Mr. Chair, make no mistake, SAG government is actually regretting the awesome music videos Michael Jackson did throughout his career when he showed minority dances across the world. Although Michael Jackson technically is black, was a minority in the USA, it still counts because these people are technically minorities even smaller than the one he belonged to. But we also think furthermore that the people they are trying to like be against, just Miley Cyrus made for like showing a twerking video, something like black people do, is actually something we would argue later on as regrettable because it is somewhat actually something that the black people would actually want at the end of the day. Because we think two things. Firstly, culture is something that can be a hybrid. It's something that can be appropriated. And people can actually interpret it in different ways. And it's important to know that even like the cultures these minorities have right now are in fact amalgamations of past cultures and are actually in fact not completely like just like a 100% original to begin with. But more than that, we'll tell you why even these minorities stand to gain financially and stand to gain in terms of representation as they stand. Those will be our two arguments today. Before that, I want to rebut two things. Firstly, he said that celebrities most often in the debates we're going to talk about, right now, are going to show these minorities in a really horrible light. And we're not quite sure what this means. We have to explain it, but we'll assume maybe he's talking about them just making them look like a really horrible caricature that sounds maybe racist or something like that. Okay, maybe it's like a discrimination. Here's why this is a horrible argument. We think we have two responses. The first is these celebrities, and in fact, his second argument actually supports this rebuttal, or actually also susceptible to the call-out culture that exists within their own country, within like the international community. You live in a much more globalized world where people can actually criticize these people. And these celebrities stand to lose. Because like he said, they care about their fame. They care about their money. And if you piss out of like minorities because you're known as a celebrity who just like makes fun of all like these minorities in the world, you won't be able to like get your next new hot video because the minorities will probably think that you're just really a joke and you don't really take all cultures minorities seriously anyway. So I think even that characterization works for us. But secondly, let's assume, okay, that maybe this is a world wherein like the majority is so completely ignorant, although we don't really know a society that exists. We think it's still good. Because this means that this kind of context shows that the minorities in these areas don't stand much to lose anyway. We would question what is the bigger harm there. What needs to be done, therefore, in these kinds of contexts is to have a broad discourse, and this will result in these videos that maybe caricature them and whatnot. And why do you think these are still better? Because it's a good thing if the bigots are known in society. So these minorities know who they should be bashing, who they should be going against. As a value you're happy to stand for in this debate. And we think the trends show that often, minorities throughout the world stood to gain when they actually show these videos. What's the proof of this? If you look at Miley Cyrus' twerking video, where she was like basically copying like black dances, this actually did two things. She was transitioning my arguments. Firstly, it actually made them more popular and more visible. And you would extend this not just to black cultures, but minority cultures everywhere, especially if you're a very obscure culture. If you think about it, the kinds of like things these people would want, given that their cultures are not being shown anymore, they are dying, needs, ladies and gentlemen, attention. So people will be probably willing to like watch them some more, or give money to the conservation of like the kinds of art that they show here. And these are the kinds of things that happen when you allow these celebrities to do what they're doing. It's what are they doing? They hire a lot of people from these minorities to consult. They put these people in their music videos because otherwise, then it wouldn't be an adaptation of that culture, obviously. It would just be a music video of like, let's imagine like their characterization, right? If it was something the minority didn't like consent to, then it probably wasn't an adaptation. Because it would be like just white people dancing, twerking, but then you wouldn't even like understand, it would like be an adaptation. I don't think that characterization would make sense. So obviously, there in a majority of cases, people are consulted, people are consenting and show these kind of things. The question in this debate is whether it's a good choice for these minorities to consent to. I think it's a very good thing. First argument, right? Because we think that if you think about it, what these people need right now is gained when you actually when you are able to give these minorities ability to take risks, right? And why will they be able to take risks? Like Kanye West, for example. It's because they are rich. Because they are able to have capital in case they fail, a music video sucks, or something like that. But these can only, many of these celebrities only pop up when these majority cultures at the beginning can actually like, adopt these kinds of cultures and then teach and make these people more famous in the long run. These minority people who they hire more famous in the long run. For example, you have celebrities who are black or Latino, but might have a manager, might have someone who builds a majority within that culture, who then gets the capital he needs and is able to actually create the kinds of discourse we want from society. That's the first point. The proof of this is actually Kanye West. Because you think about it, his previous videos, and when he was first originally famous, might have been like, for example, not too original, not too unique, not too much of a showcase of African culture. But in his later albums, like when he showed the music video Love Lockdown, you essentially had African themes, African tribal beats in that, EDM kind of like hybrid there. That's something we would stand for, something that cultures, my minority cultures will stand for the game. Second argument why we want a hybridity of cultures.
Sir, when these people from these minority cultures are hired to portray their cultures on these music videos you talk about, do you really think you're representing the correct culture that these people protect and
yes,
stand for?
That's exactly my second argument right now. Why it is a good choice. If you think about it, culture, ladies and gentlemen, is an amalgamation of many different casts, and even the future, the present right now is still culture. And in the future, they will see the present right now as exactly that unique culture that we want. And why make these minority cultures stand to gain? If you think about it, we would say it's impossible that you would essentially lose everything just because some people interpret their culture the way majority people want them to. Or you have white people suddenly doing things black people do. In fact, it is a celebration of a globalizing community that says anybody in the world can actually adopt these kinds of things and appropriate the way they want to see these things and actually be happy with these kinds of things. If you think about this, hip-hop culture is a perfect example of this. Because even though in the past it was just used as a home for black people, it has become something that is now popular worldwide. You have a dance that's extremely evolved. You have music coming from different countries, and many people might actually look at it in the past as something that was a result of minorities standing together. It could only happen if you could adopt that culture. And we think it is a value because if you think about it, it is a better form of culture when instead of having the myopic view of distancing yourself, closing yourself off, and you're closing your borders to everyone, saying you're the only best person with this unique thing nobody can copy and emulate, that is something we would consider actually something that is not something worth celebrating. Because that doesn't lead to evolutions of culture and more things to enjoy in your broader society. That's something we're happy to stand for. Thank you.
Kindly leader of opposition to the stage to continue the debate on the government bench, led by Ashok, Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we think celebrities are the last people that you want to give this avenue to represent a culture that they don't really stand for, and they have the option of going out in any way they like, may it be good or may it be bad. We think this creates a very difficult situation for those small minority communities, and you heard their sentiments on how they want their cultures to be represented in the world, or they want their cultures to be represented to their communities, right? We think this creates a certain problem. In this debate, I will tell you, number one, how the integration process between these cultures within these nations are harmed in allowing these kinds of things. And number two, we'll tell you how these cultures themselves are harmed in the process of and representing them in any way they like. But before that, let's look into three pieces of rebuttals from what L1 has to talk about, right? The first idea he talks about is that this is a more globalized world, right? And these in their own argument, you've shown that these are minority cultures, people who do not have the kind of traction, the kind of influence, and the kind of monetary and financial abilities to actually harm these kinds of celebrities, which means that these people and their sentiments are further shoved down the rug and not cared for at all. Moreover, even if you piss these people off, right? Look at what happens. If you talk about Miley Cyrus improperly portraying the culture, African cultures in the form of twerking, right? And there were a lot of black people, a lot of African Americans or African cultures who were against that. However, did that really affect the publicity of Miley Cyrus? Because we have to understand that in showbiz or these celebrity cultures, not yes, sir, in these cultures, even bad publicity is a good publicity, right? At the end of the day, when people do get to know or whatever dissent they have about this individual, Miley Cyrus, going out or Kim Kardashian breaking the internet, or all these kinds of things that happen. These things attract attention to these people and further distort the culture that these people stand for, which we will explain further in our argumentation. But more importantly, that they say that these minorities don't have much to lose because they need these kinds of discourses to happen, and they need to create sides so they know who they need to fight. Let's understand that even if you do create these sides, where you create a side between Africans who oppose celebrities who are underrepresenting or misrepresenting their cultures, these African cultures don't really have much of an impact because they are these minority cultures. Moreover, you're creating the division within these people that creates the problems of integration that is required within the nation, which we will show you in the argumentation moreover, right? But most importantly, right, the third piece of rebuttal is that these celebrities can take a risk, right? This is the problem that we have here. These celebrities having this ability to take a risk, right? It means that they can take a risk to misrepresent these cultures. They can take a risk to insult these cultures, and they can take a risk to show impunity towards these cultures, right? We think allowing celebrities to do that, we think this creates a problem in the deterrence that these people need to have in order to respect these kinds of subcultures, so that these subcultures can grow and flourish the way that they want, right? In a minute, sir. So let's move on to the argumentation part of this, right? So with the context we have given you in the form of rebuttals, right? This shows you the problem number one, the argumentation we have, which is that this creates an integration problem that we have in these societies, right? The more and more that you create these sides in the form of discourse that the LO wants to bring you, right? The more and more you are creating divisions within the nation, right? You have divisions within the nations who are African cultures, or you have Hispanic subcultures, or these kinds of subcultures who now clearly know that people from the white majority cultures, or these kinds of cultures who have had a history of showing impunity towards these cultures, are now not only misrepresenting these cultures, but those are the cultures that people tend to think are the representations of those cultures. Why? Because as my first speaker has already shown you, that these celebrities are powerful opinion leaders, right? So even if Miley Cyrus shows that twerking is such a popular African culture, even though it's not, that's what all of us think today, which is why they brought it up in the argument in the first place, right? So not only are you misrepresenting these cultures, but you're establishing that these are the cultures, or these are the representation of these cultures in a wrong fashion, right? But more importantly, when you see that the children of these subcultures, right? You see these parents of these subcultures who believe strongly in their cultures, who have strong sentiments towards these cultures. When you see their sons and daughters seeing Miley Cyrus portraying these kinds of cultures in a wrong way, and they're having these forms of confusion where they're questioning their parents that, wait, you're teaching me the wrong thing. Miley Cyrus is doing the right thing, right? Because we live in a globalized world, they're more likely to believe Miley Cyrus than their parents in a lot of these cases, especially given that these are minority cultures, right? So we think this creates tension between the originators of these cultures, and how this amalgamation that they want to talk about is not in the right direction, not respecting the culture that we need to be representing, or we need to be respecting in these cases. But before that, I will take your house.
So what is an inherent value to the preservation of culture as a culture of the minority?
The sentiments that lie below, that entail with these cultures. When I teach my daughter, or in my culture, what to do or how to live their lives, or the traditions that we have in these households, right? When they teach their sons and daughters all those things, these are deeply sentimental issues, right? When these are deeply sentimental issues that these people value, these people have followed for hundreds and thousands of years, we think just going out there, some celebrity dissing these or misrepresenting these is harming the sentiments of these people, and we don't think you should be doing that to these minority cultures, because they have a higher priority in the representation of these, right? Which is what brings us to the last idea, which is how the cultures themselves are affected, right? Even though the LO comes up to show that cultures are hybrid, and we can see to that cultures are hybrid, right? But how do you make those hybrid cultures, right? Those hybrid cultures are okay when they have a straight train of thought, right? Where the things that we pass down from our daughters, those things evolve within their families. The things that they take in from other cultures within those cultures, right? We think that some other random person from a majority culture that already has a history of shown impunity towards my culture. When they misrepresent my culture, we think the amalgamation that they talk about is not in the right direction, because A, they're not taking in the sentiments of the culture that you need to be taking into account, but B, you're completely distorting the cultures in a completely different line of thought, because these people have never gone up and have been exposed to these cultures for the first 20 or 30 years of their lives, and they suddenly come up and destroy all these things. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, we think that these celebrities do not have the incentive of properly representing these cultures, and this destroys the sentiments that entail the cultures that these minority communities deeply respect and protect. That's why.
Thank the Deputy Prime Minister. And now to end the front half of the debate, I'd like to provide Angela, the Deputy Leader of Opposition, for
Ultimately, we're all for furthering culture and for making sure that in a globalized world, it's much easier for people to integrate. It's much easier for people to be able to understand and appreciate where other people are coming from and why they act in a certain way. But we have to understand that in as much as opening government wants to be able to defend culture, that culture is what people in society make of it. That culture is what people in society understand. And if you want to have a culture where people are more likely to be able to see these ideas in the first place, but second, better to be able to make discourse about these ideas. That's better in a society where we have people in positions of power, like celebrities, use that influence to be able to make society have the benefit of the doubt to listen to cultures that in the past have been traditionally silenced or traditionally just been brushed aside, right? We have to be able to defend this because we understand that in as much as we're already integrating in so many aspects, that the integration in culture is just the next logical extent, right? Before that, 3 lines of rebuttal. First, PM brings up to us 2 hard strikes. First, he says that we shouldn't allow celebrities to do this because they're motivated by money. 2 questions we ask, right? 1, what's so wrong with adapting cultures from minorities all the time? You have to understand that even though we're from majorities, we adopt cultures all the time in much different ways, even though we're not celebrities. Kids before rapping became popular, even though they were white, could still believe in rapping if they felt that it was cool, or they felt that it was something that they could relate to. People could still read literature by people like Chinua Achebe or Gabriel Garcia Marquez and still be able to fight for the causes represented in that, even though they weren't part of that culture, and adapt that because they found value in it inherently, right? We have to understand that if there's a positive benefit, then we're going to be likely to be able to want to be able to opt into that into the first place. And second, he says, oh, it's bad because they're making a profit off of it. And we don't want people to make profit off representations that aren't necessarily true. You have to understand that we profit off cultures all the time, right? If you look at restaurants, this is why we have African cuisine in Asia and Asian cuisine in Africa. Because we understand that there's a value in letting people be able to see these cultures and to be able to understand them. What we're fighting for on our side is that culture is not so different from all the other things that we do. And as long as we have a society where we're more open to discourse, where we're more open to having things like further integration, no thank you, then it's a lot easier for us to be able to integrate a society as a whole. What's the second harm? He says, the harm is that they're portrayed in a twisted way. If you understand me and my partner, it's a little hard to be able to understand because they didn't exactly tell us what necessarily is a twisted portrayal of these cultures and why is that something that's necessarily wrong. You have to understand that even though I'm part of my own culture, I don't always get my culture right at the same time. But the idea is that you value the identity behind that culture, and that's something that we're pushing that narrative. You may not 100% represent it faithfully, if there's such a thing, but at least you understand that there's a value in being a Black person. There is a value in being able to appreciate the things that they necessarily appreciate. Right? But it's not about the mindset that these celebrities are likely to take. No, thank you. Roy already told you that they're more likely to want to be able to stay faithful to the culture. The fact is, celebrities have a template, right? They know the things that sell. They know what's popular, and for them to be able to want to deviate from that, to delve into things that society has not heard of before, already shows us that more often than not they have been touched by something that they're fascinated by a certain practice. The very idea that they're deviating means that we can assume that they have a good motive. It may be that this is something that's unique that they want to bring out to society. It may be because it has moved them in a different way. But the idea is that's where they're more likely to be able to hire people to be able to tell them what that culture is like. Where they're more likely to be able to listen to consultants, no thank you, and to be able to faithfully represent that. But let's assume that their motives aren't good, right? Why is it a good thing, even if it's not faithfully represented? Roy already told you that there's already a value in being able to mix cultures, because you can't have hybridization of cultures if they're not adopted by celebrities in the first place, right? And this is what I'll tell you about later. And if their motives are not good, then we see that discourse does work in society. You may be a minority, but if you feel like you are being offended by the way your culture is being misappropriated, then that's where discourse comes out. And it's much easier for people to be able to see where the lines are drawn and to be able to know what's easier for you to be able to know where the lines are drawn, and easier for you to be able to understand what necessarily is a good thing and what's a bad thing, right? Because this is where you have things like children rapping and children twerking. Lastly, you have on this idea of you have better integration on your side, right? And this segues into my argument. On one, we have to understand how integration is a lot better on our side, because we necessarily unblur the lines. And second, why is this something that's no one is the celebrities, and why should we be able to capitalize on their power? Before I move on, open.
Ma'am, when motives aside, when these celebrities go on saying Big Mac is probably African culture, and that's what comes out in the news, do you think it is fair to the sentiments of those African cultures?
No. You have to understand that's what's racist on your side. Is the idea that just to say that if I say that twerking is a black thing, is that necessarily a bad thing? No, it's something that's true. In the same way that I can say that ballet has been traditionally dominated by whites, the idea is you are merely saying a fact. But on your side, it only becomes a harm if people operate on the lines of culture that have already been drawn. What we're saying is it's a lot easier for them to be able to transcend those lines in a society where people in powers of position have an incentive to be able to take that out of society, and where society is willing to be able to listen to them because they have already put trust in them and are willing to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? First, let's understand, and this is in response to the argument brought up by Deputy Prime, right? The idea is hybridity, as my partner brought up, is already a good thing. The fact that interpretations and that the way I see culture and the way you see culture are mixing is already the same, as long as it shows that the appreciation we have of these things is the same. You have a unique way of looking at the field where lines were previously drawn. You may not have known about them before. You may not have been able to represent them before. But the fact that you're able to take that uniqueness means that as a celebrity, people are much more likely to react to that. The fact that you are deviating from the standard that has given people money means that that's where you're more likely to get discourse. Because we have seen in the past that when people deviate from norms, that's when change is more likely to happen, right? Like when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat for a man, when people bring up things like the disparity of gender when it comes to roles in film, right? The idea is it's a lot easier for people to be able to influence change if you're willing to give them the avenues in the first place. And we're saying that celebrities aren't just rich and powerful, but they're influential in the way that they can influence change in society. Right? The idea is women in film are heavily misrepresented in a way that only 17% of them have speaking roles. And this is something that trickles down into society in the way that in legislature or in businesses, only 17% of women are in high-ranking positions. And it's the very same thing with this. We have to understand that we need to be able to put them and these cultures into a scenario where they're able to be able to voice out their concerns. Because it's only then where we undraw the lines, where we take away the idea of what necessarily is a black culture or a white culture and create them into a hybrid, that we're better able to represent both cultures then. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy of Opposition. I conclude the opening of the House. Now I'd like to invite member of government to the speech.
Cultures of minority groups goes far beyond dancing methods and singing methods, right? I mean, those are at best popular culture. The fact that they are only quoting stuff like dancing and singing has already showed you how cultures of these minority groups are being portrayed in the media and status quo. That is not the way we want it to be portrayed in status quo. We prefer cultures when it comes to traditional cultures of how this particular religion or culture is being promoted has to come from the people itself, and it is the stance that's coming from CB. We believe, yes, we agree with what the Deputy Leader of Opposition said. Culture may be subjective, but we believe that your minority should be the ones to first publish or portray your culture into society, and it should not come from someone who's a faker or trying to be a faker, right? How are we different from side opening government? Opening government talked about how facts should be trivialized, and also they talk about integration of culture. On side closing up, we'll focus more on why we don't want these celebrities to be the face of this culture, and we tell you how is it more likely that they will be the face of the culture than two harms to come with it. Sit down. Before that, let's engage with OO, right? Most of the rebuttals be integrated anyway. Because their main ideas coming from their side is, look, at least on our side, we get to push for the idea that black is a narrative that is important, right? At least we get to push for the idea that there's an avenue for change, etc. Yes, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the motive of this person is. We don't want this particular culture that is inherently from a minority group to be portrayed first by a majority group. Even if you don't talk about change, honey, Rosa Parks was not white. She was black also, right? If you don't talk about change, it's a lot better when it's been pushed by people of your own minority group, right? We believe that all of your benefits you talk about can also be achieved on the outside and a lot better. The whole idea of hybridization is completely redundant in this debate, right? Because we can say we are okay with how culture evolves, for instance, but we're not okay with this celebrity of a dominant group pushing for it. That has to be the debate. The debate has to sit down, focus on why this celebrity should not be the face of their culture, and that is how CG debate, right? Let's go on into explanation of substantive, right? On how we don't want a non-native citizen to be the face of this particular culture. Right? Let's talk in context on how this minority culture is in status quo, because that analysis was lacking, right? If you concede this minority group, this culture is a minority group, then you have to concede the attention to this culture is going to be very much limited. We're not just talking about dancing and singing, rapping, etc. We're talking about Native American cultures in the US. We're talking about the Amish culture in the US. These are cultures that will never get as much face time compared to other more dominant cultures, right? So what happens now under their side? Sit down. Right? When someone of a dominant culture takes on a minority culture, that in itself is something that the media is like. What more if a celebrity does it, right? It's something that's already explained in opening government. We tell you, you just further add the attention that this celebrity is taking on his minority culture. This is where the harms come into the debate, right? Because I got two harms for you. First, we tell you how this person will be the so-called face and culture of this ambassador, right? Because yes, we concede with our opening talked about, right? How they told us that this is where we conclude opening government's argument in terms of why we believe it is unjust that how your culture is perceived comes first from someone who's not from this culture, right? Because when we talk about a culture like the Amish culture or even the Native American culture, we talk about how Johnny Depp, when he was playing a Native American person in the movie Lone Ranger, right? Where in an interview he said that he took it a step further by saying, look, I want to change and restore the dignity to this role, right? The Native Americans did not like it. They did not like the fact that someone who's not a Native American is taking on and saying the burden that, look, I will help you people, right? This is something that we are not okay with. Why is that harmful? Second level of analysis. Because you remove the real problem that actually happens within this culture group to begin with, because whatever problem they have is based on how you perceive it. Let's talk about the Wildest Dream music video by Taylor Swift, right? When this music video was first published, I was in a context of an African context. But what it entrenched further is the idea of this colonization of the white supremacy, right? Even in that video, you keep entrenching this white supremacy, that whites are always better than blacks. Like, even in the video itself, you had blacks as the ones who were setting up food, etc. This was something the black people did not like. Yes, Taylor Swift said, I'm bringing discourse to your black attention, etc. But this is not something that they would like, especially coming from someone who's a white supremacist. Right? You take away the problem from the real problem that exists within this group itself, and that is something we are not happy with, right? Before I go on further, yes. Why should these obscure minorities who will never be heard on your side anyway get to dictate the choice of like all these other minorities we need to engage with who like to be portrayed in this side?
Why do you assume that some people enjoy it and some people don't enjoy it? Even you want to talk about culture, you have to talk about the roots of your culture, right? When, for instance, if you talk about how a culture is particularly entrenched, if you talk about, for instance, the second level of my analysis on how their idea will just trivialize this culture into a fashion trend, and that is something we do not want, right? If we talk about in 2008, when Cameron Diaz started off this bindi wave, right? Bindi is this thing Indian women put on their forehead. She started on this bindi wave because she wanted to adapt Hinduism, which eventually she dropped, by the way, right? This started off a trend for other celebrities like Cindy Crawford to use it on a runway walk, right?
This is a form of theorizing their culture into fashion trend, right? Because what was the purpose of women wearing bindi to begin with? It was a sign that, look, I'm finally a family woman, right? And it's also for other instances to get rid of evil eye, for instance. These are ideas how bindi has to be portrayed in public, not by some white supremacists putting it on as a fashion accessory, right? This is something that we are not okay with. And it is something that is definitely going to happen under your side. Because we tell you, even if you look at cultures, there's a spectrum of cultures, right? We're talking about cultures that have not even been explored or very much little in terms of your native. And talking about cultures that are minority cultures are up and coming, like your blacks. But you have to focus more on these minority cultures that are not up and coming. Because the first image of these cultures is going to be the celebrity. Celebrities pushing for your traditional items as something that is that are pushing for your traditional item as something as a fashion trend, a fashion accessory, something you're not okay with. Like the POI coming from closing opposition, like, look, at least you have some, what are the benefits of preserving your culture? It's not just entirely about preserving your culture, it's about how your culture comes up first. If you really want to preserve a culture under your side, the type of culture you're preserving is not the type of culture that was intended to be to begin with, right? You can't just tell me someone who's somewhat adopting to know a lot more compared to someone who has being abided, right? On side closing government, we just want this culture to come first and foremost from the people themselves, because we don't want how it be trivialized under their side, on how it will become a fashion trend, and also secondly, it'll take away from the real problems people face on ground.
Like member government has speech to give the closing opposition. I'd like to invite the member of opposition.
Mr. Speaker, we're going to talk to you about two things in extension to closing opposition. We're going to first talk to you about the biggest hole in our opening speech, which is telling you what the end goal of any cultural amalgamation is, which is the creation of a situation where we preserve culture, not as minority culture, but just as a way of life. And that's a situation where individuals, irrespective of their race or any other identity they get by virtue of accident of birth, can choose to opt in or opt out of a culture merely by virtue of it being a way of life and not being linked to any identity you are given by virtue of accident of birth. And we'll tell you why that results in full self-actualization. We'll then tell you by the signaling effect that celebrities from dominant cultures, some whites in the United States, for example, are best placed to create this and the benefits of that. But let's first deal with three rebuttals from what we've heard from the government bench, right? First, they say that minorities should be the ones who represent their culture and it shouldn't come from majorities, right? We first question what the inherent value to this is, right? We don't think it's possible for minorities to get the kind of traction they need to create a situation where people can hear about that kind of culture. Which means, Mr. Speaker, that Amish culture is probably going to get swept under the rug unless there is somebody who has the ability to attract attention towards Amish culture to begin with. We think that is particularly harmful because we think there are people who otherwise don't have access to Amish culture who may choose to integrate into Amish culture and actualize a lot better and actually feel good things about Amish culture and just actualize a lot better and become more productive in society, right? We think that is a benefit that they do not have on their side of the house, right? But we think that the accessibility just becomes a lot more better there. But what do they secondarily tell us? They tell us that the majority celebrity who adopts this culture is now going to become the face of this culture, right? We think first it's problematic for them to suggest that it's going to become acceptable for people for a certain culture to become acceptable only if members of that culture talk about its acceptability. We think people have a tendency to look at those within those communities talking about their own culture with a certain level of skepticism, right? We think when a black man goes out there and says that there are certain things about my culture that are acceptable and good, the other community has a tendency to look at it with a certain amount of skepticism. We think this is dealt with in situations where there are white people adopting these cultures and going out there and saying that this is acceptable. Because this is an outsider who is now lent some sort of legitimacy to a culture that is otherwise otherized and treated as a minority culture that should not be accepted in society. We think there is an inherent benefit to an outsider accepting the culture and telling those who belong to the majority who are not otherwise exposed to that culture, saying that this is a good thing, right? But let's deal with the Bindi example and why that's important, right? Because we have two responses to that Bindi example. First, we think that the fact that Cameron Diaz chose to wear a bindi attracted attention to that respect of Hindu culture or that respect of Indian culture to begin with, right? A large number of people were now aware of what the bindi meant and why so many people from South Asia around the world wear that bindi to begin with, right? But secondarily, we question why the bindi should not become just a fashion symbol and something that the white people can co-opt and integrate into, right? Because we think individuals or white people who want to wear bindis because they feel like the signaling effect that bindis have on their lives, or the fact that they want to wear it because of the message they want to portray to other members of their community is valuable to them. We think denying them that is a problem because it results in the compartmentalization of culture to just people who otherwise are linked to their culture based on their race, which means that the Indian people, for example, can wear bindis. Which now takes me to my two constructives, right? First, I'll talk to you about why we need to move to a situation where we de-link culture from the race or other inborn characteristics of an individual and why it's important for this person to be able to integrate into a culture otherwise, right? Because we think the harm that you have in status quo is when an individual from a majority culture, a white person, for example, signals acceptance of a minority culture, we misconstrue that acceptance and deem it illegitimate by saying that this person now wants to become black. Which means that if Eminem wears baggy clothes, we say well, Eminem is trying to become black, instead of just understanding that Eminem is adopting a different and probably for him a more legitimate way of life, right? We think there is inherent value to suggesting that there is another legitimate way of leading your life, which probably gives Eminem a lot more benefit than behaving like the stereotypical white man. And only in closing opposition are you going to hear about how the breaking away or the delinking of racial identity from the way you behave in society is important to determine how you actualize in society, right? Because we don't think that it's okay for you to say that, well, we want the legitimacy of my actions to be determined by the way I am born, right? We think individuals should be allowed to freely move into different forms of cultural ways of life. We think, for example, if an Asian man wants to become a gangster, we think this Asian man should be allowed to do that. Because in status quo, the way Asian men are perceived and the kind of Asian culture that you've created in the United States means that Asian people have to sit behind a computer and work and code, right? We think that is problematic because it restricts the ability of the Asian person to actualize and to experience humanity the way he wants it, right? We think it's really, really problematic because you have linked the fact that this person was born into an Asian family to the kind of job he should do, the kind of family he should have, and the kind of clothes he should wear. Closing.
If you're telling me the tension is good, then why did the African natives have a problem with Taylor Swift's music video?
Mr. Speaker, we don't understand where the inherent problem with then saying that there is like a mischaracterization of culture, because we think the amalgamation of culture in the short term does certainly create some kind of so-called misconception of how culture operates. We think in the long term, the integration of culture and the creation of a situation where you just look at culture as different ways of life will necessarily take care of this, because African people will understand that there are things about their culture that other people are now taking into account, and African people will also have the ability to take certain things that are otherwise considered white culture into theirs and use it if they feel that as an individual they feel that is the way they want to go ahead, right? But why is it the dominant white celebrities in the United States who should be doing this, and why are they the right people to bring about this social change, right? Because we don't think cultural preservation has any inherent value in and of itself, right? When an individual isn't allowed to behave the way he wants and not actualize, we don't think there is any value to it. We think in that situation, the right person to bring about this change is the dominant white celebrity, because the way white people in the United States consume media and the way they, as a result of the consumption of that media, behave in society is linked. We think the way dominant white celebrities behave is the way a large number of people who identify with them behave, right? Which means that if Eminem signals some kind of acceptance of black culture in terms of saying that it's okay for an individual who feels like it to wear gold chains and loose clothes, we think that is legitimate and it is the right way to bring about acceptance within the white community of that kind of life, right? Which means, Mr. Speaker, what we've told you in closing opposition is that culture must not be viewed exclusively in terms of how individuals are born into some kinds of communities. must be viewed as a way of life which could be legitimate either way you choose it. And we think this is how individuals will actualize only in closing opposition we are proud to oppose.
And the member of opposition for that speech. Now conclude the government bench. I'd like to invite Government Whip Speaker Raj to
Here's how I'm going to construct my speech. Firstly, I'll deal with closing up, and secondly, I'll deal with opening up, and lastly, I'll be talking about why our extension stood until the end of THBT. So firstly, let's move into it. Let's talk about what closing up was to talk about. If you realize, their case is contingent on the majority accepting the minority culture, and we think that is accordingly wrong. It should be the other way around. It should be whether the minority accept that you are willing to adopt their culture. It's not whether you as a majority think I can adopt the culture. So we don't think that's right. He gave an example of Eminem, how Eminem was willing to take up the black culture. Wrong. What's important was whether black people acknowledge that he is one of them, whether black people acknowledge that you could be part of it. It happened when Dr. Dre acknowledged that you are part of us, you are part of our crew, you're part of Escobar's record. Not the other way around. It's not whether Eminem wanted, it's whether the black individuals, whether the rap gang would want to take on Eminem. So let's deal with this extension. Because he said we are stopping people from changing their culture. No, we are not. Even if you're born as Asian, even if there's stereotype that is embedded with you being born as Asian, fight them. You can prove other people wrong. Even if you want to change your culture, and this is a very important analysis. How do you change your culture? It's by actually living in the culture. It's actually living your life as someone else. For example, if you want to be a black person, you have to understand the plight of black people. You have to understand their way of life, their entrenched culture. Because we are going to differ from opening. We're not just going to talk about music and stuff. We're going to talk about race, religion. Cultures have been embedded to race and religion. So the analysis that they need to give us is why celebrities. We don't think celebrities should do it. Because once celebrities doing it, firstly, they dilute the actual culture. Because they are not living in the culture, they do not understand. And secondly, this is very important, they become the face of the culture. And this is important. Why? Because people of the minority did not consent to it. We are okay if you are any other person. We are okay if you want to delve into a culture. But we are not okay when you're not doing it through the proper methods and when you are a celebrity, because it will be trivialized by the media. Okay, please sit down. That's basically what closing opposition brought to you about. We are locking people into their birth lottery. We are not. Anyone can change the culture. So now let's talk about opening opposition. So opening opposition want to talk about how you create a culture of hybrid, how people's culture will be intertwined. So what's the problem with that? Here's the thing, not anyone can adopt a culture. Culture is exclusive. It's based on your race, religion, it's based on what you protect. So if you want to form a new culture, we tell you there are ways in doing it. It's done when two cultures are intertwined with each other. But the creation of new culture happens when you're actually living in a part of the culture, when you're actually living in it. For example, when your Australians are living with the Aboriginal, that is when you form a new culture in itself. What are celebrities doing? You're not living there, you're not even doing it, you're just adopting a culture and making it as a means for you to gain money, etc., etc. We say it's not right. Okay. So are celebrities doing it? Are celebrities actually formulating a new culture? Because they try to run on an extreme idea of how we are creating new culture. No, we are not creating any new cultures. You're just adapting the cultures, and we don't think that's right. You're just hijacking their culture, and you're practicing it without the consent. Because they try to tell us that minority has consented to it. And we say no. When leader of opposition came up here and tell that minority has consented to it, it is wrong. Okay, so we have done with the hybrid of culture and things like that, etc. So now let's talk about how the leader of opposition talked about how we are making culture more popular and visible. Wrong. We tell you, even when you make it more popular, even when you make it more visible, it is not assured under your fight that you're making it right. It is not assured that you're portraying it in the best light ever. Because if you want to talk about music video, I can give you a few examples. Let's talk about a song by
a song called Ali Boumaier. It was talking, the music video was about people who are in Zaire, Africa. They were portraying people in Zaire, Africa in the wrong light, and we don't think it's right. Just because you make it popular, just because you make it visible, we don't think that you're making it right on any way at all. So, before I move on to our extension on closing up, I'll take closing.
Is there any inherent harm to an individual making money out of adopting a new culture? The effect of that is more attention on this culture and therefore an output to a more legitimate way of life for a large number of people who are otherwise compartmentalized into some culture by virtue of the way they were born.
Okay, but here's what I'm going to rebut you for this. Because you are telling me that it's okay because people are shining light on it. It's okay because people come to know it. And here's where I add further rebuttal. Because he told us that if we don't do this, if the majority doesn't do this culture will be swept under the rug. There'll be no light. People would not know how Amish people have reacted. And I quote, this is what he said. We say, so what? So what if people don't know what Amish culture is about? The Amish people are not begging to please the whole world. Let's understand my culture. They're not doing it. What do they want is the preservation of culture. And that is important because once you trivialize it, once you become the face of it, it becomes an issue. You have no legitimate claim to that sort of culture. And we tell you that Amish people are okay if no one understands their culture. Amish people are okay if no one wants to get into their culture. What they are not okay is when you try to adopt their culture and you misrep their culture, and that is what we are never going to stand for. So let's move on in what Vino talked to you about. What did Vino talk to you about? Vino talked to you about the face of the culture. We tell you that this is inherently important because culture is a right. Culture is a right of this individual. It does not just come, it's a way of life. It is entrenched in your race and religion, and they have a right to it. This is why, principally, culture is sometimes exclusive to some people. This is why they have high sentiment value. So let's talk about, for example, if you go and meet a village folk, if you enter a village, they will always view you as an outsider. They will not allow you to just practice their culture in and of themselves. They will not allow you to just practice just like that. What they will do is they will want you to live with them, understand them, spend sufficient time with them. Only then they will acknowledge you, please sit down. So only then they will acknowledge you as one of their own. Because we recognize that it is a sentiment value. It's theirs. And once you put a face of majority there, you're spitting on their face. You're misrepresenting them. And that is harmful. Secondly, fashion. This becomes a trend. Because once you dress up like another minority, it becomes a fashion trend. Member of opposition tried to say that, it's a good thing. People understand your culture more. People understand why you're putting a photo on your head. Wrong. When Cameron Diaz did that, all people did, it was fashion. They tried to mix match the color of your photo with your clothing. People did not understand why you're putting it. Don't tell me when Cameron Diaz did it, people understand. What is the significance of you putting it on your head? They had no idea whatsoever why the Hindus are doing it. All they saw was, it was a fashion deal. It was something that is nice. It's something that we should do. And once Cameron Diaz dropped it off, people stopped giving it that. People do not understand why exactly are you actually putting the photo? Why exactly are you wearing a sari? That is not something that we are willing to stand for. At the end of the debate, what we must understand is, should celebrities do it? Will they understand? We tell you no. The chances are they do not understand their culture and they're only trivializing it. And we don't think it's fair for the minority for the various harms that we know talking about. For these reasons, we are proud to propose.
With that speech, now to the opposition bench as well as the debate as a whole, I'd like to invite the opposition
Mr. Speaker, during my speech first, I'll respond to some of the engagement we got from closing government. After which, I'll proceed to deal with the clash that was played out mostly in the opening half and partaken in by closing government about whether the minority will like it or not and tell you why that's a clash that we cannot resolve in this debate, and therefore it's the wrong metric to judge this debate by. After which, I shall analyze government case, tell you why the harms they're pointing out will not happen, and tell you why we and closing opposition when we dealing culture from identity are the ones bringing the most benefit to this debate, right? But first, what did closing opposition take first? Two things. First, they said that our case is contingent on the majority accepting the culture of the minority, right? We think that's a straw man of our case because our case was a problem with the ownership of culture by identity, right? What we wanted was there to be sufficient role models who have shifted culture, who have adopted culture that has traditionally belonged to other identities. We wanted those role models to have a significant effect onto other youth so that their choices are not branded as illegitimate. This was never contingent on a larger societal acceptance of a minority culture because of the values of that culture, but this was contingent on the acceptance of the fact that you can move through cultures and not an acceptance of the culture itself, but of the act of moving through cultures and the act of adopting another culture if you like it. So we don't think that really was our case. But what they said was if you really want to change your culture, you should fight for it. I mean, you're free to do what you want to do, right? We think yes, but we should make it easier for people who want to do that, right? You look at real world examples of this. You look at Eminem, who first started out as a white person who adopted what is stereotypically black culture, wore baggy pants, jewelry, and rapped, right? After which people like Machine Gun Kelly in the United States or Asian rapping groups in the United States, such as Gentleman's Wife, were able to come to the larger stage and adopt that identity because it became easier for them to do so. Because the only people in the rapping arena were not Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg, but Eminem, right? And the larger effect of that was that white youth in Brooklyn or white youth in places where that culture was dominant and who really, really wanted to wear jewelry and wear baggy pants could point to aspirational models, could point to role models and say we can legitimately do that, right? We think why must individuals' choices be brandished as legitimate when what they're doing is simply making a legitimate choice? That is something they never engaged with us on. We don't think their engagement was sufficient, right? But what was another clash that happened during the debate? Does the minority like it? Because from government, we have heard plenty of assertions about how the Amish people are not okay with representation of their culture when opening opposition says, but they are okay with representation of their culture. About Cameron Diaz's being right? We think the problem in all of this is that we're treating minorities as a homogeneous group that has a singular opinion on something, right? You're treating all of Amish people as having one opinion on when someone does something. You're treating all of the African American community as having a singular stance on Eminem, right? We don't think that is the case. We do not think you can make those sort of assertions and get away with it in a debate. Which is why we do not think that is a clash that can be solved. Because if we are going to throw around examples of Amish outrage or Native American outrage, we can also throw around examples of Indian pride when Hillary Clinton wore the sari or when Cameron Diaz wore the bindi, right? There are people who take pride in their cultural artifacts becoming fashionable and trendy thing in the modern world, right? We don't think that is the correct metric to judge this debate on, right? We don't think exotic or minority practices must always be treated as these spiritual, esoteric, cultural artifacts whose meaning you must understand. We think the bindi is very capable of simply being another accessory you match to your clothes, and people actually like that at times, right? So what else did government bench tell you? Because opening government case was that these representations will be bad and harmful, and this will drive minorities away. Closing simply extended that by saying celebrities are the wrong people to do this, right? What is opening case premised on? It's premised on two things. First, that minorities or that identities own culture, right? This is the problem, and this is what we have responded to at closing opposition, right? Because you need to understand that there are people who, despite having one axis of identity, such as being white or black, also have other axes of identity, such as being born in say a Brooklyn ghetto, or such as liking a particular form of music and wanting to wear clothes that are prevalent in that form of music. We think when you reduce the kinds of culture that are legitimate for them to this one axis of identity and a singular axis of identity, you really harm the way in which they want to experience their life and the way in which they want to live their life, right? We think if there is a white youth who wants to opt into this so-called black culture, he should be allowed to do so. It should not be seen as an illegitimate act. Similarly, there is a black youth who wants to adopt into what is stereotypically white culture. He should be allowed to do so. The end goal, and this is not opening opposition is because they did not have a clear end goal, that we should move to a post-racial society, move to a society where it does not matter what race you have or what arbitrary characteristic you have for you to adopt a particular way of life. We want to make sure that identities and minorities do not own culture, that people adopt whichever culture they want to, and celebrities play an instrumental role in that. Right? I'll take open.
So when these celebrities give that representation, then that is the only form of legitimate form of that culture that people believe exists, right? So you're giving that ownership of culture to the celebrities, guys.
No, that's not what's happening, because we reject the premise that that becomes the only acceptable form of that minority culture. Right? That is not what happens. The signaling effect is not with respect to the culture they adopt, but to the act of adopting a culture, right? Because there are multiple celebrities adopting multiple cultures, adopting multiple forms of culture. So Kanye West Love Lockdown video has African American in traditional African costumes, but Eminem adopted in a different context, right? So we don't think that that becomes the only acceptable form of culture you adopt. The signaling effect is with respect to the act of adopting a culture, and by that act must be an hierarchy to perform, right? The second premise in opening case was that there is an inherent value to preservation of the correct form of that culture, right? We think that misrepresentation is in fact reflective of larger societal perception of that culture. But we also thought that representation there is no aim and validity. So when the corporate charts are crowded out with people writing about gangsters ghettos in the United States, and Kendrick Lamar raps about actual problems with police violence, people think they are not attention to it, right? But on losing government, we think celebrity is not only a signaling effect, but we think there is inherent value in outsiders speaking for another group, because these people are the front of their, which means we see black people promoting black culture are simply coming from a particular place. That does not happen with white people doing so. That does not happen with powerful celebrities doing so. We think it is important that you send out a message that it is legitimate to adopt whatever culture you want. That your culture is not identity.
Thank you all for taking time to step outside and